Welcome to this episode of our program Daily Debate. As usual, we will be discussing a contentious debate. Today we'll be speaking about the G7 and the participation of President Fattah al-Sisi at the 45th edition of the G7 summit. This year it is taking place in Biarritz, France. And it has been taking place from the 24th till today. President Fattah al-Sisi was invited in his capacity as the head of the African Union chairman from the French President Emmanuel Macron. The President definitely stayed for 2 days or 3 days rather, during which he made several activities. He gave a speech before the G7 speaking about the partnership of Africa with the international partners and how important that has been in order to be able to confront the challenges facing the African continent. He also made several sidelines meetings with the G7 or the group of 7 presidents and heads of states. The President was able also to speak about much of the African vision or promote the African causes as well as the Middle East, since Egypt is playing a pivotal role in both regions. We'll be speaking about that in our episode tonight. Let me welcome our guest, Ambassador Gilan, Allam, former Assistant Foreign Minister. Thank you very much for joining us.
Pleasure.
Thank you. Before we delve into our discussion, first let's have this quick report. And President Fattah al-Sisi meets U.S. President Trump on the sidelines of the G7 summit. Let's watch.
During a meeting with U.S. President Donald Trump, President al-Sisi underlined the importance of rallying efforts by the international community to curtail terrorism and stop providing weapons and financial support to terrorist groups. President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi stressed on Monday that backing national institutions would certainly help preserve the unity of unrest-hit countries and end sufferings of peoples. Presidential spokesman Bassam Radi stated that among a host of regional and international files the two presidents discussed, President al-Sisi asserted Egypt's support of efforts directed at finding a just solution to the Palestinian cause based on international resolutions that restore stability to the Middle East. During their meeting, the two presidents agreed that the Libyan and Syrian crises should be resolved politically in the nearest time possible. President al-Sisi stressed that supporting national institutions in Libya and Syria is of critical importance to maintain the unity of the two countries. President al-Sisi lauded strategic relations binding Egypt with the U.S. and the positive development of relations between the two countries under the Trump administration. President al-Sisi said Egypt is keen on developing relations with the U.S. in all domains and maintaining coordination on ways of achieving peace and stability in the Middle East. Trump expressed appreciation for the security, stability and development Egypt has achieved under the leadership of President al-Sisi. He stated that the U.S. is looking forward to developing cooperation with Egypt at all levels, referring to Egypt's success in carrying out economic reforms and boosting the overall development process. He also added that the U.S. is keen on increasing trade exchange with Egypt and joint investments. Trump lauded Egypt's pivotal role in the Middle East region and its efforts in combating terrorism and cementing foundations of peace and stability in the region. He also expressed support for President al-Sisi's efforts to enhance principles of freedom of worship and religious tolerance.
Opens up to the world. President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi meets with world leaders.
أعبر لكم عن خالص الشكر والتقدير على حفاوة الاستقبال وكرم الضيافة.
Reaffirming Egypt's vision, delivering our voice abroad.
لتطوير التعاون الثنائي الاقتصادي والعسكري إلى مستويات غير مسبوقة.
Discussing regional and international developments. Solid and strong relations on the path of partnership and development.
Egypt and France have historical relations dating back to the end of the 18th century. French culture had and still has a significant impact on the Egyptian life in general, since the establishment of the state in Egypt and in modern sense, in the period after Napoleon and the era of Muhammad Ali. It was the French who opened the doors of ancient Egyptian history, helping us to read our ancient language and to reach what we know now about this Egyptian civilization. One of the most prominent of the French aid is the disappearance of the Rosetta Stone, which was found by an officer of the French campaign to Egypt. The hieroglyphic writing was disappeared in 1822. Muhammad Ali began to build modern Egypt. The Egyptian missions went to France in all fields of science and literature, from Rifa al-Tahtawi to Taha Hussein and others. We cannot deny that generations of Egyptian intellectuals were influenced by the writers and ideas of the French thinkers and writers such as Voltaire and others. One of the most important Egyptian books is The Influence of the French Civilization on the Vision of Rifa al-Tahtawi for Women, an encyclopedia of Egypt's description as a result of the French campaign. During the 18th century, Egypt made France a destination for its student missions and relied on French advisors for it wanted to establish schools, universities, or scientific bodies, or renew its life in any productive branches. During this period, the French participated in the construction of the bridges, buildings, and schools. In the military field, Muhammad Ali Pasha used French officers to establish the modern army of Egypt and to establish the modern navy. 2019 is a very special year in the history of the relations between Egypt and France, coinciding with the 150th anniversary of the opening of the Suez Canal, which is one of the great achievements in the course of bilateral relations. France's significant participation at the Cairo International Book Fair as the Golden Jubilee, held on the 2nd of January of 2019, is one of the most prominent features of the Year of Egypt. France 2019. In the Opera Big Theatre, the first performance of Paris Opera Ballet with the participation of Cairo Opera Ballet took place. In the Grand Hall, the Lafayette in France's King Tutankhamun exhibition will be held. It includes a number of gold jewels, also in carving statues and funerary furnitures. Paris is the second phase of this exhibition. Egypt sponsors this exhibition as part of the global tour between the countries of the world for the monuments and artistic pieces of the Golden Pharaohs, which are unparalleled.
أعبر لكم عن خالص الشكر والتقدير على حفاوة الاستقبال وكرم الضيافة.
Reaffirming Egypt's vision, delivering our voice abroad.
لتطوير التعاون الثنائي الاقتصادي والعسكري إلى مستويات غير مسبوقة.
Discussing regional and international developments. Solid and strong relations on the path of partnership and development.
Right, welcome back. Indeed, this is the Egyptian-French Cultural Year that has been taking place since the beginning of 2019, with different Egyptian activities taking place in France and different French activities taking place here in Egypt. And that is not part of our discussion, but the G7 this time taking place in France. Let me welcome you again, Ambassador Gilan, Allam, former Assistant Foreign Minister. Thank you again for being with us. This year, the main theme of the G7 is fighting inequality. Definitely, lots of issues has been addressed, including the international security, the counter-terrorism, cybersecurity, human trafficking, and legal migration, combating inequality, supporting women empowerment, climate change, as we said, and many issues were on the agenda of talks. Of course, Iran took a high focus on the agenda of the discussion, many issues. If we start first, so that audience would understand the G7 and what it reflects and the power it reflects. What is the G7, what it reflects?
Okay, let me start by saying that the G7 is composed of 4 European countries. That is Germany, United Kingdom, France, and Italy, and the United States, North America, Canada, and the United States, and Japan. These are the 7 largest economies of the world. in so many, in other words, actually these 7 countries own or produce half of the wealth of the world. So we can imagine the impact they have on the way the world is running, and also how they can affect or divert the interests and the importance of this diversion on other people and the rest of the world. That is one. The other thing that I think we have to is to go a little bit back. Why is it the 45th edition, the annual edition of the G7? Let us go a little bit back to the October War in 1973, when there was this embargo on oil, when the OPEC countries, and particularly Saudi Arabia and Iran of the time of the Shah in 1973, they cut off the oil going to Europe and the rest of the world. So basically to Europe, because of the 1973 war, where they stood, where there was an Arab united front helping Egypt and standing by Egypt and that war, and where it ended up with the peace agreement between Egypt and Israel. At that time, there was always talk of, and then of course, this embargo on the oil supplies to Europe basically led to a very high rise in the price of oil. So actually, this affected the economies of these countries, of the biggest economy, because Japan depends on oil it imports from abroad, China, India, these are the biggest, and definitely Europe. So this affected that. And this is where the beginning of speaking about a new international economic order. There are very strong documents emanating from the United Nations where it had special sessions talking about this issue. A new international economic order based on this rise of price of oil and how it will affect everything in the world, because everything needs power. So this is where it started. So it started by a small idea coming from the United States, saying that the biggest countries, the biggest economies of the world, we have to come together and discuss how we are going to face up this, because this is a major development and change in the structure of the world economy of the time. So they started that, and then it became an annual event, and it continued this way. In 2014, Russia, after of course, the 1990 dissolution of the Soviet Union, and Russia was the took the heritage of the Soviet Union. So Russia joined and became the G8. Yes. But after that, there was this discrepancy, Crimea from the Ukrainians and so on. So but let us note that in this session, 45th session, President Trump, in spite of all the discrepancies and all the sanctions the United States is imposing on Russia because of Crimea, he made it a very serious point, is that the G7 have to become the G8.
Yes. Yes, that was very much illustrated, and even all countries agreed on that if Russia did not really join, then at least strengthening relations with Russia would be a priority.
But the European Union didn't agree to the American proposal, to the US proposal. They said that they cannot accept that notion of having Russia rejoin the G7 to become the G8.
But they accepted strengthening relations.
But let me tell you this, good news, is that the chairmanship of the G7 is going to the United States in 2020. So I think this is where they will be able to push again on that issue. And maybe things will be changed between both countries along the lines. We don't know. I mean, the world is really in turmoil, economic turmoil, political turmoil, social turmoil, internal regimentation government. So I think the world is coming to really facing major decisions in how the world is going to be reshaped.
Very much indeed. This year, Egypt and President Fattah al-Sisi participated in his capacity as the chairman of the African Union, or Egypt as the chairman of the African Union. And the president was very much focused on really presenting the African causes at large and the Middle East as well. But let's speak first about the speech he gave during the first day of the summit. It mainly focused on countering terrorism and empowering women and many issues, illegal migration and all that. The president was very much keen to stress on the importance of coordinating stances and collaboration among the international partners in Africa in order to be able to face the African challenges. How did you read the statements regarding this issue?
Okay, let me say, of course, the President of Egypt was invited to attend and participate in this 45th edition of the G7 because one of the main items was working with Africa. So there had an interest, that was an issue that was there, because the G7 has, the chairman of the G7 has the authority to invite some other countries other than the G6 now, I mean the other 6 other than the chairman of the G7 to participate. If they actually they choose a topic that would be the main topic of that. So that time it became Africa. We know that France has a long history and a long relationship with Africa. So actually another 4 countries were invited, head of states. It was Burkina Faso, Senegal,
South Africa,
Rwanda, and South Africa. And I have to tell you this, South Africa is the coming chairman of the AU in 2020, and Rwanda was the former chairman of the AU in 2018. So because usually the 3 of them are usually connected, working together. Usually it goes this way. So this is why. And also India was invited, and Chile, India representing Asia and Chile representing Latin America. The chairmanship, the presidency of Egypt of the African Union this year led the president of Egypt to have a working lunch before his meeting and speaking on the important issues that matter basically to Africa, so that they can, and actually there was also the Director General, the Secretary General of the African Union, so that they can have a unified vision of what is they have to say, what it is that is so relevant, so important now to present to this major 7 of the world, and actually to the whole world. Because this particular session, it comes at a very strong junction in the world history. We have trade wars. So to the extent that China vis-a-vis the United States, and the United States, the President of the United States goes to the extent of saying the United States will not allow China to become the #1 economy in the world. So that tells you to the extent of that war. You have economic war between, you have another economic war and general war between United Kingdom and Europe, the Brexit issue, so to speak. You have terrorism, you have extremism, you have so much. You have also a tendency of going away from multilateralism. So now the United States has gone out, I mean, the United States in particular has gone out of so many multilateral commitments during these last 2 years of President
NAFTA
Trump
and TPP
and so on and so forth. So this G7 meeting had Africa under the microscope. So they had this meeting. When the president went, I think this message, this particular speech of the president is a very, to my eyes as a diplomat now, is a very important, because it is not a storytelling of what are the problems of Africa. there is a major change here, is that he said, we don't, in not so many words, we don't need help, assistance, and aid. We need partnership.
Yes.
We need relationship based on equality, on parity, on equality, of not interfering in our decision, of making decisions for running our countries and our resources. We speak of what we need, and you are welcome to choose to help in this regard. Cooperation. We're speaking technology. We're speaking digitalization. We're speaking a fair share of the resources of the world. I think these 7 countries have made their wealth based actually on the major direct investment of the African countries and other countries, of course.
Yes.
But now Africa needs to be back on its feet.
And here I'm quoting the president, or part of what he said is our transformation towards the digitalization, and also giving us the access to the world market. That was part of the demands of the president in order to be able to accelerate with the African 2063 agenda. And that also he spoke about, I will raise the issue of Britain and the United States, and of course the meeting, the important meeting taking place between President Trump and the new Prime Minister, British Prime Minister. But I have to stress on that, because when the president spoke about an African vision regarding how international partners should be helping Africa to overcome their own challenges, because Africa has lots and lots of challenges. What he focused on was how the international partners should really help Africa achieve its agenda of 2063. How did you view the vision he illustrated or he gave during his speech?
I think this is a very pragmatic vision, very workable vision, and it's a vision that goes along with the main principles of what we should be calling a new international economic order. This is what the world really needs, to review the older economic, let us say, principles that were prevailing in the economic arena in the world, in economic relations between countries of the world, and now doing this. For example, I give you, for example, the impact of climate change. Africa is surrounded by water all around. I mean, you have the Mediterranean, the Atlantic Ocean, the South Seas, and then the Red Sea, and the Bab el-Mandab, and the Indian Ocean, and so on. Now, Africa is the least, altogether the 54 countries, are the least countries emitting any CO2 that affects the world climate. And yet, they are the most countries that are affected by it. So you have desertification in Africa. You have no basic infrastructure in Africa because it was never. You have problems of energy in Africa. That of the time where Africa has water, Africa has sun, Africa has wind.
Natural resources and...
I mean, it has resources, basic resources for the major industries, which the major industries and the major inputs from the world come basically from Africa now. So they have all that, and yet there among the 54 countries, there are 32 countries that come in the list of the least developed countries in the world. So you can imagine how much Africa has to stand on its feet. And it has to stand, it could not stand on its feet but on its own before. So now what I think Egypt is trying to do, is trying to convince, is trying to convey, is trying to bring about, is trying to show the world that it will be fairer, it will be better, it will be, if we talk about human rights, then it will be better for countries, developed with technology to help the African countries, based on their resources and based on equity and parity, to go ahead and base that development based on those grounds. And I think Africa is ready for that.
Yes. Before we go to this important meeting that took place between President Trump and Boris Johnson, or the new UK, and another important issue, which is the sidelines meeting of the president, because they were very much importance. Let's have another report, and President Fattah al-Sisi and the French president meet on the sidelines of the G720. Let's watch.
The Egyptian and French presidents met on Monday on the sidelines of the G7 summit in France's Biarritz, where they discussed developments of the regional and international issues. President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi discussed efforts to revive the Middle East peace process and also the efforts to combat terrorism, extremism, as well as illegal immigration during his meeting with French President Emmanuel Macron. According to the presidential spokesman, the two leaders exchanged visions around the situation in Libya and agreed on the importance of consolidating joint efforts to settle the Libyan conflict in a way that contributes to eliminating terrorism, protecting the state's national institutions and resources, and limiting foreign interventions. Macron welcomed President Sisi's participation in the G7 summit, praising the bilateral relations linking Egypt with France and also the cultural and civilizational ties between the Egyptian and French people. The French president affirmed his country's keenness to enhance bilateral cooperation and continue developing the bilateral relations, consultation and coordination on political issues of mutual concern. During the meeting, President Sisi and Macron discussed the economic ties between the two countries and the African-French relations in light of Egypt's chairmanship of the African Union this year. President Sisi praised the strong and special bilateral relations with France, which enjoy historical features.
Right, welcome back, and back to you, Ambassador Gilan, and the important meeting that took place between the US President and the UK Prime Minister, and how timely it was.
It was a very good opportunity for the president to meet with his counterparts from the G7. He met with the Prime Minister of Italy. They spoke about bilateral relations, basically, and the importance of enhancing these bilateral relations, be it economic or political. They of course, Italy is very much interested in coordinating on the area of refugees and illegal migration and so on. He met with the Chancellor Angela Merkel from Germany. Very good relations, very good also personal relations between the two presidents. Importance of coordinating, more coordination, more direct investment from Germany in Egypt. They have been speaking. I mean, he was invited again to Germany, Africa, Europe, Africa this year by Mrs. Merkel. So again, here. Then there was the meeting with President of the United States, President Trump.
That was a very much important.
That was a very important. They're all actually very important meetings,
but two important meetings.
This was maybe more elaborate undertakings between the two presidents. Then there was the meeting with the
French president.
the maiden meeting, ice-breaking meeting with the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Mr. Johnson. It was his first with the G7 and the first with the president, our president also. He then met with President Macron. Of course, we have been talking about the meeting with the African. Counterparts before the meeting regarding Africa and the challenges that Africa meeting. So this is more or less the sphere of the meetings. This was a very, very hectic, well organized, and a very heavy, very well structured visit for 2 days. I think this achieved a lot.
When we speak about three important meetings, no, particularly two, Mr. Trump or the US President and Macron, the host. Because many of the issues regarding the Middle East were really discussed during those two meetings pertaining the Palestinian cause, Libya, and unrest or countries in conflicts. So how do you view, how was it a chance to convey a wise thoughts in the Middle East of how to be able to solve Middle East crises?
Okay. The way I see it is that the president has a very strict pattern of conducting his, let us say, a summit diplomacy always. Is that whenever he gets that chance, he speaks about bilateral relations basically, which are economic, political, and the cooperation between those. And then he moves to the regional problems, and which are basically either in Africa or in the Arab world or in the Middle East at large. So this is usually the pattern that is being followed. If we are going to talk about this regarding the meeting that took place between President Sisi and President Trump, which was the most covered one. I mean, let us say that. Let me make also a very, I think, a worthy note is that in spite of the fact that the two presidents do not see eye to eye or do not agree according to the same line about all the issues that are between the two countries, but they are able to discuss and agree on whatever it is that they can agree upon. So both presidents agree that there is a strategic relationship between the two countries. This is an acknowledgement by the two presidents always in all their meetings. This is an acknowledgement about them. Both countries
We're speaking now about the US and Egypt.
The United States and Egypt. So this is also always a very important issue that they keep reiterating. This is the strategic importance and the strategic view of two countries of the relationships together. The relationship on the military side, on the defense side, our Minister of Defense was just, I think, a couple of weeks ago in the United States. He came back with almost $500 million of enhancement for the Egyptian naval forces, because there is an interest here again between the two countries regarding all the international waterways that surround the area of the Middle East at large. Now, again, before that, we used to be always flanked by the idea of Egypt has a bad record in governance. Egypt has a bad record in human rights. Egypt has a bad record in faith adopting and so on and so forth. We don't talk about this. We understand the issues. We make our points very clear. And it is understood on the other side. Whether it is not accepted, this is another issue. When we speak, for example, about terrorism, there is an understanding that both countries are interested in fighting terrorism, in fighting extremism. This is an understanding between the two countries, so they get along with that. When they speak about the Palestinian issue, which you referred to, the president of Egypt always states very directly, in the same terms, in the same context, along the same lines, all the views of Egypt. Fair, lasting peace, according to
the 1967 borders, or the Arab Initiative, and two-state solution,
Jerusalem, UN, refugees, and so on.
The international conventions in the
absolutely. So international legitimacy, so to speak, the UN.
Yes, indeed.
This is at the time when the United States sees it differently. It sees it that it is enough to have some kind of an economic recovery for the Palestinian chances and so on, and this is what seemed to transpire from the Bahrain meeting, that it is that came up, which didn't receive too much of a welcome. But they still keep talking. I mean, these are at the two other ends, but they keep talking. We kept speaking. We heavily concentrated on the idea of climate change, biological diversity, as far as Africa and the world is concerned. This is at the time when the United States has withdrawn from the Paris Climate Agreement. So this is a very remarkable way of dealing with this relationship, US-Egyptian relationship. Whenever we agree forcefully and we go forward. Whenever we don't agree, we keep saying and trying to work out our discussions and keep discussing on it. So this is why we had such a vibrant meeting, such an important meeting, where all these issues were discussed: bilateral relations, be it economic. We discussed climate, we discussed Palestine, we discussed problems in the Middle East. So this is how this relationship building itself in a new format, so to speak.
Yes. Other sidelines meeting took place. This time there was two surprising meetings that took place, one between the US President and the UK Prime Minister, as I said before, and the other was the Iranian Foreign Minister and his attendance or meeting with the French President. Of course, he did not meet the US President, but rather some diplomatic efforts were heard. So, tell me more about those important meetings that took place.
Well, I think the easier to handle is Iran, because Iran is the nightmare of the United States because of Israel. And so they withdrew from the nuclear agreement, which Europe is adopting and upholding and trying to uphold strongly. The French president took on himself, after consulting partners in the G7, to invite the foreign minister of Iran to go to the G7 meeting. He had his meeting with him, he departed, but I think this has left, at least, we don't have a communique. Notice that we don't have a communique coming out of this meeting of the G7.
Yes.
But we have understandings that were very much interpreted and said and elaborated at the press conference, the final press conference that the French president and the the US president had at the end of the meetings today. Is that said that, okay, even President Trump said, we are not seeking a change of regime in Iran. Yes. All we need is that Iran does not have any access to nuclear capabilities. I think, and there is no war. So, and that, I think, and Chancellor Merkel addressed it. I think President Macron said the same. So there is some kind of trying to appease this vibration, this very strong vibrations of war, of
escalation.
Escalation in the area. This is one. The other side is that what we always speak with the President of Egypt speaks with President Macron is the issue of Libya. Because France has a very strong interest in this particular conflict, with which also we have a very strong interest, because we have 1,700 kilometers of open borders between us and Libya, and this has to be covered. We cannot keep on having this kind of a crisis continuing. While there are agreements that could be reached, and I think that they reached the point, and there has been conversations, I think telephone calls between the two presidents during the last few months that have been speaking about this, trying. So I think now there is this tacit understanding that Libya should be solved through diplomatic and political solution. How do we reach that? This is the issue that has to be continued discussion. But I think that there are hopes that there might be a possibility of having a kind of a political solution if the military option try to go on one side against the other. There is a problem in the Libyan issue, is that there are parties who keep financing and keep providing arms, and I think that Turkey and Qatar have presented themselves. I mean, all this drones idea and all these Turkish airplane fighters that we keep finding, and the money coming from Iran.
Libyan keep finding and announcing all the times.
I mean, when I see German people keep finding, yes. I think this has to be come to a stop. And I think this has been made very, very clear, and that we have to put a stop to financing and supporting terrorism in all these conflicts in the Middle East and in Africa, actually. I mean, the countries of the Sahel had a meeting of their own with the French president, with the G7, where they decided that they will continue their efforts, because all these countries are suffering because of all these extreme. Boko Haram in particular was mentioned, that because they have the same thing, they have financing and they have an ample supply of arms to continue disrupting order and governments and people in Africa and in the Middle East.
Very much indeed. That was very much, by the way, one of the main points that the President spoke about when he spoke about conflicts in the region and the importance of finding political solution and putting those who are financing and funding terrorism into account. Moving to the most important issue, our participation in the G7, Africa, the Middle East, the G7. How does this reflect on us? What do we need from the group of seven, or the seven most richest countries all over the world?
Relations with countries, relations with groups. This is diplomacy. And President Summit diplomacy. And this is diplomacy for development. When you have good relations, open relations, frank relations, where you build credibility, where you work hard, when you convey the message that we are open for business. And this is what we're trying to do. So this reflects itself, what we call diplomacy for development. It reflects itself on major investors coming to the country. Investment means business, means jobs, means more open homes in Egypt, more money pouring into the country, more basic infrastructure, more goods, more education, more medical services, more transportation, more roads, more everything for the Egyptian man and woman.
Definitely,
child.
Definitely, women empowerment was one of the main issues. And how about Africa and the Middle East? Because Egypt was not representing only Egypt, but rather both regions.
Again, then this is summit diplomacy. what we're trying to bring for Africa is we consider ourselves as an African countries, and I think that our vision for ourselves is always implemented, because when we spoke about Africa, we spoke about a comprehensive approach to development. We did not say, well, these countries need this, these countries need that. No, we spoke about a comprehensive approach to development, so that we build infrastructure for the countries to allow services for the different countries. And us as chairman of the
Yes.
African Union, we have conveyed this. We have conveyed it in China when we were talking about China-Africa. We conveyed it in India. We conveyed it in Germany. We are going to convey it in Japan for the TICAD,
Yes.
Japan-Africa. And also, remember that we are talking about climate change for Africa also, because it's not only Egypt that is going to be affected, it's Africa. When we speak about the Middle East, we speak about us. We have a vision of how this conflict should be resolved, away from political, away from financing terrorism, extremism, away from. It has become now a challenge for the largest number of refugees, and internal immigration in the world is, if you put Africa and the Middle East together, it has never happened in the history
Yes.
of man that a certain geographical area has faced so much human troubles and human misery
Yes,
as what's happening now.
Yes,
And this is what we are working for and on, for all peace all around the world, and prosperity also, and security, and
Yes.
this is it.
Yes. Of course, time has run out, and it ran very quickly. I have to end it here. But definitely, there are much to be said about this issue. Ambassador Gilan, Allam, former Assistant Foreign Minister, thank you very much for being there. Thank you so much. And dear viewers, many thanks for watching. Tomorrow would be another important topic with another colleague. Until tomorrow, it's good night.